So we're looking here at part 47 in Wild Harvest Edibles. Thou preparest a table before me. And that's a title that's based upon Psalm 23. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. And we know that God is able to provide all our needs, no matter what we need or when that is. An important note as you navigate any health challenge, it's always recommended that you partner with a medical practitioner that shares your philosophy of care of the human body in disease and in health. And the information shared here is educational in nature and is a component that can be added to your wellness toolbox for both bringing back health and maintaining health. It's not to be taken as medical advice, just tools that have been successfully used by others in similar situations. And as anything that you might find, do due diligence on your own before just accepting any protocol or treatment process. Thomas Edison said, the doctor of the future will give no medicine, but will instruct his patient in the care of the human frame, in diet, and the cause and prevention of disease. In some aspects, we're doing this on a small scale, but most right now is not being done in that vein. So hopefully that will move forward in that regard, but it may not be until Christ comes that Thomas Edison's comment here will see its realization. Back in 1885, Testimonies for the Church, Ellen White stated that there are many ways of practicing the healing art, but there's only one way that heaven approves. God's remedy are the simple agencies of nature that will not tax or debilitate the system through their powerful properties. Pure air and water, cleanliness, a proper diet, purity of life, and a firm trust in God are remedies for the want of which thousands are dying. If these remedies are going out of date because their skillful use requires work that people do not appreciate. Fresh air, exercise, pure water, and clean, sweet premises are within the reach of all, but with little expense. But drugs are expensive, both in the outlay of means, that is money, and the effect produced upon the system. 3 John 1 verse 2, beloved, I pray that you may prosper in all things and be in health just as your soul prospers. So it's important to take care of our soul as well as our physical health. And Paul states and exhorts in Romans 12, 1 and 2, I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. Some good places to start in anytime we're looking at health and wellness is looking at scripture and the spirit of prophecy. So our first plant that we'll look at tonight is Bracken Fern. It's one that grows in our area, Tritium aquilinium, and it can be up to 80 inches tall. So that's taller than me. That's over 6 feet tall. In places I've seen it growing close to that tall. It has deep spreading horizontal rhizomes that the new plants crop up to. So a given area is made up of essentially clones from the rootstocks, similar rootstocks. It prefers disturbed, moist, montane foothills found all across the world and the U.S. And there's one place on the map that it does not show up, and that's Nebraska in the United States, which is very interesting. All across the U.S. you can find Bracken Fern, but Nebraska, it's a blank spot. I've seen in a couple maps of its distribution. So the leaf is very triangular in shape, and you can see that both the compound leaf is kind of like bipinnately compound. You can see as it goes out, and the whole structure is triangular, and each leaf structure is triangular, and then down into the individual fronds, and then the leaflets are all kind of a triangular fractal arrangement of the fern. It turns brown in the wintertime. The lower central picture, you can see that it turns brown, and those stalks will give you evidence of where to look for the fiddleheads come spring, because they just kind of die away and will stay standing on through the wintertime if they aren't matted down by snow. Then they break down and become the fertilizer essentially for the next crop. You can see the gentleman on the right there walking through a new fresh stand of Bracken Fern. It's wide out in the open in that particular place. The first place I remember becoming acquainted with Bracken Fern was up in northern Michigan at a place named Camp Au Sable in Michigan. And then learned later that fern is distributed all across the North America and the world. The edibility of the plant is limited to its fiddleheads, so that's unfurled leaves. You can see two different examples of that in the central picture, the small picture there, and then on the lower left, those are Bracken Fern fiddleheads that have been picked, and one that's growing. And also the roots can be utilized, and starch can be extracted from those roots that can be used in a variety of ways. So when you're collecting them, you want to collect the fiddleheads in the spring as they push themselves up. Rub the hairs off. Now the fiddleheads on the right, those look like they're steamed. Now the one on the lower right is a Bracken Fern fiddlehead. The one on the upper right is also an edible fiddlehead. And the lower left, those are from an ostrich fern. We may talk about those at a different time, but they're also edible. Particularly the Bracken Fern, you want to soak them overnight before using them, and then boil them twice in salted water and discarding that salted water each time. They have some compounds in them that you are ridding them of as you do that. They actually have some compounds in them that have some carcinogenic attributes to them when eaten raw. And I've eaten the fiddleheads raw a time or two, as I see them. However, they probably should not be done that way, especially in quantity. If you're going to use them in quantity, you want to make sure that you do the overnight soaking and then the twice boiling in a saltwater brine and then discarding that water. So you can use it as an additional vegetable at a meal. So here's a no-fry fiddlehead stir fry. So that's kind of a funny name for it, but most stir fries utilize oil, but this isn't going to be using that high heat or the oil. So it's been adapted for an oil-free situation. So take a ½ pound of Bracken fiddleheads and make sure that you've done the boiling and the soaking as indicated above, and then ½ pound of other vegetables. So they could be other wild vegetables or other veggies you might have. Could be carrots or celery or other traditional kind of veggies, or they could be other wild plants. So then you're going to saute in water a minced garlic clove and 1 tablespoon of ginger that can be diced or powder, 1 onion that's been diced, ½ cup of soy sauce if you like, and then a ¼ cup of honey. And then water is needed. So typically in a stir fry, you would be using oil as the basis for the frying, but you can do just a water saute, and that is useful for softening up the veggies and the sauce. So mix the fiddleheads and the veggies in a large bowl, and then you're going to saute the entire lot of the vegetables or Bracken Fern, as well as the sauce until it's tender. And then you can use that to serve over some kind of a grain. So rice or quinoa, could be like bulgur wheat or amaranth, or your choice essentially, but serve it over something else. So for extracting the starch from the root, you can eat that starch raw or cooked. So here's a range map on the right there. You can see this all over Alaska. And interestingly, the northern provinces of Canada, except for, I believe that's Saskatchewan there in the middle, that doesn't have it on the map, along with Nebraska. And then you've got Manitoba, and moving east, you have Alberta and BC moving west. So you can grind it into a powder. The white kind of rock-looking pebble pile there is actually starch from bracken roots that has been made from a lot of bracken roots. And that is then broken up and then can be pulverized into a powder. So it's about 43 to 72% starch, depending on how you do it. But you dry that rhizome, you pound it, and then you would place it in water in a fairly similar technique as you would something like cattails. So cattails, you would put it into a water basin, and then you pound it and massage it, free up all that starch from the root, and then let the water settle. So the starch will settle out, and then decant the water, that is, pour off the water off the top, and you'll have the starch left behind, and then just let that dehydrate. And then you can end up, you may have a thick layer of that like sand on the bottom, a sediment, and then that's where they get this pebble-like looking batch after it's dried out and it's able to be accessible. So it stores very well for a long period of time, doesn't go bad. It can be used in dumplings and other types of things. On the right there, you'll see that there's actually some bracken starch noodles. So the brown noodles down below that looks like it has some cucumber or something shredded on top. But you can buy those brown bracken noodles. It's an Asian noodle recipe. So on the left with the Swiss Army knife there is a batch of roots that have been dug up. You can see the typical size of the roots there with a full-size spade, and the height of those bracken. They look like they'd be chest high or higher if they were standing upright, and then the rhizomatic roots there just below the shovel tip. Some medicinal properties with Bracken Fern. The roots can be made into teas and salves that help soothe the gastrointestinal tract, and on a topical level can be used for skin issues. The young shoots, you can see a whole pack of young shoots down there on the right. Those are probably getting ready to go to market, or they can be dried and used later. You'd probably want to do your boil and double salt boiling and soaking before you would dry them out to preserve them. But they have diuretic effects that increases the urine flow and kidney function. Also functions as a refrigerant, the young shoots, and that's essentially that's the fiddleheads. Can help break a fever by providing a cooling effect to the body. And then interestingly enough, they also help to expel parasitic worms, functioning as a vermifuge. So something to keep in mind, a number of different things that we talked about that have some anti-parasitic effects. The leaves can be used in a steam bath. So the mature plant there, you can just take the leaves, and that's a useful arthritis treatment. You can also use the various aerial parts for a decoction and be useful for tuberculosis, which is a lung condition. So decoction, again, is using those leaves and stems and boiling it for some period of time, usually several hours, as the liquid portion is halved prior to using that liquid portion. The root has antiemetic or vomiting properties, antiseptic, as an appetite increaser, and overall tonic effect. So tonic is something that just tends towards general health. Also helpful in stomach cramps, chest pain, some internal bleeding, and colds. It was also used as a poultice for sores and burns. And as much as anything, it's a very green plant. So green things, the greener they are, the better. The chlorophyll is very beneficial and soothing from a plant perspective, and healing properties associated with them. So lots of things can function in a poultice role. So again, that warning that the bracken contains a known carcinogen. Eating it raw, especially in quantity, is not a good idea. Better to do that, soak and cook the boil, and then decant off that and discard the water. The raw open fiddleheads have the highest levels of those, and that's typically the thing that's taken and eaten is the fiddleheads. So pre-soak, cooking them well, and if you eat them in moderation, should be fine. So it shouldn't be a primary source of food, more of a kind of a side dish or additional component. So there's a picture here of the ostrich fern fiddlehead as well as the bracken fern fiddlehead. They're both edible. The ostrich fern doesn't have the carcinogenic properties as noted with the bracken fern. And typically, I believe we have ostrich fern around here, but it's typically more prevalent in the east of the Rockies. West of the Rockies, it's less common, but I believe we have an ostrich fern here in the Pacific Northwest. A great link to a website that discusses lots of different aspects of using bracken is from the University of Maine, and they have a nice publication there on that. You may want to check that out further. The next plant we'll look at is called Clintonia uniflora. That's how I learned it in botany. And it's actually known commonly as Queen's Cup, Bride's Bonnet, or wolfberry or bead lily. And it gets the wolfberry and bead lily name from the blue berries that show up on the end where the flowers have been. That blue berry is actually toxic. It's not edible, but the leaves are edible. So it has a rhizome. It doesn't look like much of a rhizomatic plant. It's more of a lily in its arrangement, but it's native to the mountains of North America, and it goes from California all the way up into Alberta, Canada. So it's very common in coniferous forests. It's very common here in the Pacific Northwest. The flowers are small. They have 6 petals, and there's just a single flower coming up from a basal rosette of leaves. And it has 6 long stamens, and the anthers are full of a yellow pollen. And that stem is hairy, so looking at it with a magnifying glass or a hand lens, it's a hairy stem that can get up to 8 inches tall. And it has the one single blueberry. This shows that there's multiple blueberries on the one on the right there, and that may be from a flower cluster arrangement of some nature. So the leaves, 2 to 3 shiny leaves, they're fleshy, and at the base of the plant, they don't grow out of the stem that supports the flower. They're just next to the ground. And the leaves are the portion of Clintonia uniflora, or Queen's Cup, that is edible. So harvesting it, the leaves are edible either raw or cooked. So this would be a good kind of trail side snack that you could get along the trail. So in the spring, they're going to be mild and sweet tasting, and just eat them just straight away. But if it's on through the summer, midsummer and late fall, they'll still be present, but they'd be best and more palatable if cooked. They tend to get a little bit tougher to consume as they age. So there's a Clintonia mint tea that can be made, just 2 tablespoons of the young leaves. So also could call it Queen Cup mint tea, and a tablespoon of fresh mint leaves. Many people have mint growing in their gardens. It actually will grow wild too. Can actually become quite an invasive species as it just kind of spreads. And then 1 cup of boiling water. You can actually sweeten that up with honey if you wish. And then steep that for 5 to 8 minutes after having put the boiling water over it. So remember, the berry is toxic, and it'll be there in the fall after the plant is bloomed and the leaves are left behind. So the leaves are not going to be present all through the winter. They tend to die back, and then it will grow up again in the spring. So it's a good spring on through summer type of a plant. It doesn't typically grow in large quantities or beds per se. So it's not something that you'd probably be gathering in large quantities. And if you did find some, you might want to leave a leaf behind and just take 2 or take 1 so that you have enough energy to go back and continue that flower supporting the plant. From a medicinal usage standpoint, it's very beneficial for skin conditions, can have some eye benefits as a body wash for treating and dressing wounds. You can see the counties within BC, Washington, Oregon, and Northern Cal where Clintonia is found. Southeast Washington, it's present over in Walla Walla County is where I learned about it in botany class, but the central counties there, central east, it doesn't show up. It's also there in Northeast Oregon, and then also in the upper Northwest, but not out, interestingly, out on San Juan Island, it appears, or on Whidbey Island. I think that's Whidbey Island, maybe Camino Island. They're much drier there, and it has more of a rain shadow effect, which is why it wouldn't show up there. So you can use the fresh leaves. Again, a fresh leaf poultice of just about anything is really beneficial, other than poison ivy or other toxic plants from their leaves, because primarily I think because of the chlorophyll that's present. So open wounds, ulcers, infections. This is used by the Algonquin Indians and noted in their literature. The Chippewa used it for burns as a poultice, and the Iroquois used a decoction as a heart medication. Not sure exactly what aspect. There's a lot of different things that can happen with the heart, everything from tachycardia to heart attacks. So there's kind of a broad spectrum there. That would be an area that you'd want to do a little more research on. But remember that a decoction is an extraction process using boiling of the plant parts and using that heat extraction for the therapeutic properties. So again, if you'd like to review this, you can go to www.preparingforthetimeoftrouble.com.